nonprofit in Volusia County. We work on environmental issues countywide, but for transparency, I serve on the Volusia Forever Committee in the county for land conservation. I also serve on the Indian River Lagoon Council. My organization participates with the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation, which is the statewide foundation that advocates in the state for funding and wildlife protection, Wildlife Corridor Foundation, land conservation. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor in our state is about 17.7 million acres. 54% is currently conserved on estimate, and the foundation itself advocates at state level for funding. If you're not familiar with the Wildlife Corridor, it's very popular at the state legislators. They committed to funding a couple of years ago and they started out with $400 million. And that sounds like a lot, but land is pricey and goes very quickly. So the foundation has been advocating annually now for a long-term plan. This year they were quite successful, which when I get to the end I'm going to talk about funding, but they were quite successful in getting funding for the Wildlife Corridor itself. But the map on the screen is where the corridor exists in the state. They're constantly looking, you know, while 54% is a lot of land, Florida is a very big state. So if you think of it in terms of how big this state is, 46% is considered opportunity areas that's remaining in the state, and much of the state has been developed, and especially along the coast. So in Volusia County, there is area in the southeast portion of the county which is in the corridor, but there is quite a bit of area of the county on the coast that's out of the corridor, which has been developed. And Oak Hill happens to be right on the border, which you're going to see on another map that I present. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor for the state is about land connectivity. They try to keep lands connected to protect the wildlife. But in all fairness, a lot of people don't care about wildlife. That's just a fact of matter. It's not that it's not important, and it's not that there aren't people who care, but not everyone does. So other reasons to protect the corridor would be where our food is grown. We have a really big disconnect right now. When you go to the grocery store, most people think of going to the grocery store for their food. In reality, the food is grown somewhere, and it happens to be, a lot of it is grown in the Wildlife Corridor. So we have ranching and farming and reasons like that to protect the corridor. And then understanding tourism and economics in the corridor, I just covered farming and ranches and tourism, land management. There are approximately, from about a year ago, it was said 128,000 jobs in the corridor itself throughout the state. While that may not sound like a lot, 128,000 jobs, and a lot of that produces food, the food that we eat. That's pretty important. Those are important jobs.
Look, let me ask a question. Is 128,000 jobs associated with the wildlife corridor itself, or with growing food and farming and?
Associated with the corridor itself, because you also have tourism, people who do tours, kayaking, boat tours, fishing, all types of jobs.
Ecotourism.
Ecotourism is what I'm talking about here. So approximately 50, so this is the Volusia County map. This is the Volusia County Wildlife Corridor within our county, as we relate to the state itself. So approximately 55% of our county, it just is by sheer coincidence, we follow the state numbers. We are very close to the same numbers as the state is what we've protected. So about 55% of that green area is protected. That is the wildlife corridor, but that's not all that's protected. It's about 55% of that area. So we do have development in the corridor currently. And our corridor in our county was created around 2001. So we've had the same designated area for about 22 years. Because we had it for 20 years, then Volusia Forever was voted on, and 75% of the public voted to renew it. and we are about 2 years in. And this is my second term on this committee. We went 8 years without any committee in Volusia County because the county used up the money in a little under 12 years the first go-round. So we spent all the money, and we had about 8 years where money was being collected to pay off bonds and so forth, but we were not still pursuing new land. So about 2 years ago, we started back, after it was renewed, pursuing new land. So on June the 16th, the Volusia Forever Committee for the county voted unanimously to pursue the research to expand the corridor in our county. We have limited areas that may qualify, and it has to be researched through the Florida Ecological Greenway Network. That's a mouthful. The Florida Ecological Greenway Network is responsible for determining the lands in our state that qualify for Florida Wildlife Corridor. Now, why would that matter? Volusia Forever is a matching funds program, and currently the way it works, if you have land within the Wildlife Corridor, it qualifies for Florida Forever funds through the corridor. If you're outside of the corridor, you have to figure out where your funding is going to come from, which is St. John's Water Management, Community Trust, sometimes cities. There's been cities who put up part of the money themselves, but funding is always an issue, being that we have a matching funds program. So we have to vie for his matching funds as often as we can.
The city of Oak Hill reached out to Volusia Forever on 42 acres on the lagoon. It's really unbuildable. They got an appraisal on that property and they will not pay above the appraisal. So from the standpoint of a landowner who I think had that property up for sale for $2 million, it behooves me, if we're gonna try to protect the corridor, then the idea needs to be, if you've got a piece of property like this one right here, 42 acres, that would be ideal. Because it's right next to the National Wildlife Corridor, which is south of us. And it made no sense to me, and I realize y'all aren't in control of that, but somebody needs to step up and say, if we're gonna secure these lands with the inflated prices that we've got, then we're gonna have to meet that inflated price if we're gonna protect the corridor. I mean, let's get serious about this. It's like the lagoon. If people don't get behind the idea that septic tanks are causing a problem, it's gonna continue to be a problem. I mean, it's just like the corridor. I mean, we got a governor that says come to Florida, and they're coming here in droves. And the corridor, even though it's supposed to be protected, it's getting eaten up by development.
That's
Because-
why I'm here.
Yeah, because the landowners can get paid what they want. And to me, Volusia Forever is in competition with those individual developers. You know, I mean, it's a frustrating thing.
So, can I respond?
Yes,
Okay, so I wanna make it clear that I'm not representing the committee, I'm representing my organization. Even though I serve on the committee, I don't represent the committee. Secondly, the committee itself has absolutely zero to do with the negotiations. We don't, see the contracts, we're not involved in the talks. There is literally not one iota that the committee is involved in the negotiations. Third, I'm just gonna ask you, is that, I may not say the name properly, but I think I'll get it close enough. Is that the Sternstein property?
I think so.
Okay, so, there is something going on with that. I'm not at liberty to talk about it right now.
You've said enough.
Okay,
Proceed.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I literally only found this out in the last 2 days.
Good.
So, timing, it was just kind of the way it worked. So where was I? So funding is always the problem. And sometimes things take a very long time, like what we were just talking about. And I see this a lot in our county. Sometimes they never come to happen, but I just wanna say that, things don't, with matching funds and pricing and all these things, they take a very long time. I'm used to navigating long time. So, this is the funding that was passed this year at state level. There were, funds for farmland that were not passed. That ended up getting nixed at the last minute, but there is still a farmlands program that they can apply through. It just so happens that the state level funding did not get passed, but there is a farmlands program. And not all land is purchased, there are also easements, easements on property, as well as purchase, but for the sake of this presentation, there's $100 million in the Florida Forever program for conservation land. And then the city itself, you may want to know, I left it on the slide, for the $976 million for conservation and recreation land acquisition. There's a few things on here that do not apply directly to Florida Forever, but the city itself may benefit from, and that's on your presentation there. And then the $850 million for the lands within the Florida Wildlife Corridor specifically. So Volusia County, the way it stands right now, we only have about 25% remaining land in our county that would qualify in that specific category of that $850 million. But I wanted you to basically see that land conservation in our state is supported. I also want to add that throughout the state, while we have more springs here than anywhere in the world, in our wildlife corridor, a lot of our drinking water is not included in the corridor. Before you ask me why, the corridor was created before I ever became involved. I just told you our own corridor was created in 2001. It just so happens that the foundation the Wildlife Corridor Foundation, earlier this year put out a report on the water in the corridor and the quality of the water and where it was located, and it just so happened that a lot of the drinking water in our state was not all located in the corridor. We do have some in the corridor, but not all of it. So, Volusia Forever, we're just gonna do a quick rundown. It's a willing sellers program. There are no guarantees. With what we have remaining, it has to be what's called land truth. They have to go through the Florida Ecological Greenway Network to get that secured, to see if it even qualifies. It's been 22 years. This is a very solid argument for researching what we have left and the fact that we are already at such high land acquisition within the corridor. We have so the overall corridor in the entire state, they have priority 1, 2, and 3 lands they're referred to. In our county, we only have priority 1 and 2. We have no priority 3 lands. 1 and 2 qualifies for state level funding right now the way we are.
What's the difference there?
So priority 1 is the most environmentally sensitive, the highest desired, and it actually goes from 1 to 5. 4 and 5 do not qualify for funding. They're environmentally sensitive lands, but they're not included in the state funding. Now that doesn't mean they can't be purchased in other ways, but they don't qualify for wildlife corridor funding. So in our specific county, we just have what's called priority 1 and 2. So the Volusia County Council is going to be voting on this, and I'm here to ask you for a letter of support to pursue the remaining lands. They have to research and put forth the effort, and then those lands would qualify, providing they meet the requirements through the FEGN, Florida Ecological Greenway, they would qualify for funding. And at this point, we owe it to ourselves to pursue funding and expanding. It would actually be expanding the corridor in our county. Now, to expand at the state level, for us to expand in our county, the county staff can do. But the state legislators have to approve expanding at state level. This is being talked about a lot right now. And because of the length of time of our land conservation, the 22 years, within the state, we are the leaders of the pack. We started ahead of everyone else with our land conservation, with our program. So we would be among the most likely ones to really push this conversation about expanding the wildlife corridor in the entire state. But what I'm here for is a letter of support for the research to be done within our county and to pursue this for matching funds. I'm going to the cities that I felt like, smaller cities. For example, I went to Pearson. Looking on the map, they may or may not qualify. They would be a city that wouldn't have lots of matching funds. They're in a highly sensitive area, surrounded by sensors. You are as well. So I've got a limited amount of time. Before I came here, I was on a Wildlife Corridor Foundation meeting, and it's looking like August the 1st, one of the representatives from the foundation is going to come to our county to talk about this. So if you are willing to provide a letter of support, I would really appreciate it by the end of the month, by the end of July. And then basically that's it. If there's any other questions that I can answer, I'm happy to try to answer them.
The letter of support commits us to, we're saying we're interested in this, we believe it's important, but what else does that commit us to?
Nothing. I'm not asking you for any money. I'm not asking you to do the work. I'm asking you to show support for the research to be done to expand the corridor in our county. And the reason you would want to do that is for matching funds. And I'm asking you to do it for your city, but I'm also asking you to do it for the greater good. Because right now, until the research is done, we don't know where in the county is going to qualify.
All right, so how is that done in that the research focuses on this area or this area or this area? How is that process?
So there are the FEGN, the Florida Ecological Greenway Network, they have maps. And I was just given access to the maps myself right before coming here. The county staff is gonna have to put forth the effort by the areas that we have remaining in the county that haven't been developed and that are not already in conservation. And keep in mind, we have conservation in the county that is not in the wildlife corridor. We have St. John's water management properties. There are privately owned conservation areas. There's state parks. Like, there's a lot to be considered here. So navigating around all of that, the remaining areas that are not developed, that would be environmentally sensitive, would be considered.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, are we in agreement to,
I'll make a motion that
we don't need a motion,
All right.
we just do it by consensus.
Okay.
All in favor of a letter of support?
Yes.
It's a yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell me who to send the letter to.